Hello all, this is Queenie Liam and welcome back to my channel. This is part 2 of my 2-part video series all about my grid and the math behind it. So if you haven't already seen part 1, I suggest that you go back and watch that first so you understand why my hair is in this weird style right now. Also, I talk about how I prepped my hair before I started sectioning my hair and the reasons why I wanted to vary the sizing of my microlocks in the particular algorithm that I'm about to show you in this video. So if you've already seen part 1, let's just jump right in. So in part 1 of this video series, I talk about my reasoning for why I wanted to vary the size of my locks and also why I wanted to put smaller locks in the front and larger locks in the back. But an additional reason is because I compiled as many pictures as I could of installation grids. And what I found was, in general, the smaller locks were always put around the front and the back and the nape of the neck. And the larger locks were always centered in the middle back of the head, where the hair is in general thickest. So now that we have those 3 anchor lines that we established in part 1, I'm going to show you how I estimated the surface area of my head. So the reason that I want to estimate the surface area of my head is so that I can estimate the average size of my locks and my average lock count that results from a particular size parting. So to do this, I use the center line and my crown line. So first, let's measure my center line. So that's 15 for my center line. And 14 for my crown line. So now we're going to multiply 15 by 14. And that equals 210 square inches. So that's the approximate surface area of my head. So next, let's look at my DIY sizing tool. If you're wondering about where I got this DIY sizing tool, I made it myself. And I also made a video all about how I made it myself. It's a super easy method. I will put a link to how I made this DIY sizing tool in the description box below. So this DIY sizing tool is the visual representation of the different sizes of microlocks that I found on the internet. So the sizes go from 1/8 of an inch to 1/2 of an inch. So in general, I don't think that many people use the 1/8 of an inch anymore because they're, as you can see, very small. And then on the larger end, I think in general, 1/2 of an inch is a little too big, or anything over 1/2 an inch is going to have a much larger lock than what is considered microloc. So as you can see, I put too big right there. So there are 3 sizes between what I defined as too small and too big. Those are 1/4 of an inch, 5/16 of an inch, and 3/8 of an inch. So to figure out my target average size for the microlocks that I would install on my head, I took 210 square inches and I divided it by these numbers in squared inches. So if I made all of the locks on my head 1/8 of an inch, that's 210 square inches divided by 1/8 square inch, I would have 1,680 locks. 210 square inches divided by 1/4 square inch is 840 locks. 210 square inches divided by 5/16 square inches is 672 locks. 210 square inches divided by 3/8 square inches is 560 locks. And if I made all of the locks on my head 1/2 of an inch squared, that's 210 square inches divided by 1/2 square inch, that equals 420 locks. I use those numbers to decide what size I would make my locks on average. I already knew that I didn't want over 700 locks because I didn't want to deal with the length of the retie that would result from having over 700 locks. That would take forever. And I also knew that I didn't really want under 500 locks because that would mean that most of my locks would have been somewhere in like a little bit bigger than 1/2 of an inch. And 1/2 of an inch is already very large for microlocks. So I definitely knew that I was going to have to make more than 500 locks on my head. So I decided that my target average range would be between 550 to 600 locks. So that meant that my target average size would be around 3/8 of an inch. Because 3/8 of an inch, if I did it on my entire head, I would end up with 560 locks. And then my smallest locks would be somewhere between 1/4 of an inch and 5/16 of an inch. And my absolute largest locks would be 1/2 of an inch. And the reason that I also had to think about that is that I knew that if I added smaller locks, that would make the number go up. And if I added larger locks, that would make the number go down. On that note, I am now going to start explaining the general parameters for how I laid the grid down on my head and my anchor sections. So my anchor sections are actually different from my anchor lines, if you'll remember. So I consider my anchor sections the entire front section of my hair because it's so visible to the public. And then also the 4 locks on either side of my center line as they run back down to my spinal cord. So to explain the general parameters that went into all of this math, I'm going to go put my hair back in those original 40 sections right now, and when I come back, we'll get into all the math you've been waiting for. Okay, so I'll be back in a quick moment. Okay guys, so real quick, before I go any farther sectioning my hair back into those 40 original mini braid sections, I wanted to show you a couple things while my hair was like this. First of all, I wanted to just show you how my mature locks look and the different sizes between the different locks and different parts of my head. So you'll see, for example, this is a very small section up front that has 16 locks. So this is what these locks look like. But then similarly, this is also a section of 16 locks. So as you can see, they're a lot thicker, but they're not too much noticeably thicker than these. These ones, like right now, are about the size of a pencil, and I'm expecting that when they're done fully maturing, they'll be around the size of a regular Sharpie. So maybe a little bit thinner than this pen. And then I expect the ones in the front to mature in their final state to more around the size of a pencil. Right now, my locks are only at 3 months, so they're nowhere near their final stage yet, but we'll see how they keep maturing. So if you want to keep following my journey, make sure to subscribe below so that you can see how my locks do over time. I also wanted to talk about the 2 mistakes that I made when I was installing on my first grid and how I fixed those in my second grid. So this is my first grid. I actually started installing locks on this grid. So I started installing this section. And I actually did do 16 locks in this section before reassessing what was going on. So I did that section, right? But then I stopped because I noticed 3 things. So first of all, the parts, if you see them, all of these parts are rectangular. They're not square. And then also I was worried that if they stayed triangles, that would put an uneven amount of tension on the base of the lock on different parts. So I knew I wanted squares. So that was one reason that I decided to do my grid a second time. And then I knew I wanted this section that I started to work on to be one of the biggest sections on my head. But I was looking at them and I was like, wait, those are way too small. If these are the largest ones on my head, I'm gonna have well over 700 locks. So that was problem number 2. And then on top of that, if you look here, my occipital line is curved. So that bothered me. So I started from scratch. And this is the second grid that I created, and I'm so glad that I didn't give up and that I kept pushing forward to that second grid. So I had already installed some locks basically in this section. It crossed over into what became new sections. But rather than removing those 16 locks and redoing my grid, I just decided to push forward. And I decided to leave them in because interlocks take, for me, they would take about 45 minutes per lock to remove, and that's just way too long. And I decided, you know what, I could always combine some locks in the future. So in this section, there are actually 20 locks now, because this is what I ended up doing. Just adding 4 locks next to it as if nothing had happened. And then in the adjacent square, on the opposite side, I have what I should have done, which was just 16. So the ones in this section are slightly larger than the ones that you have in this section, but I think that I can just combine them if it's ever an issue. Right now, it doesn't look too visually dissimilar. Now, that's not to say that my second grid was perfect even after I redid it. So, for example, this is still my second grid. So for this section right here, I initially planned on making this 4 locs high and 4 locs wide. But as I was getting closer and closer to having to do this section, I kept thinking, I don't think that's gonna work. And then I measured the actual sides of this section, and this side is 2.5 and this side is 3. So that confirmed my initial feeling that if I ended up making that just a box of 16, that would have made it so that those were the largest locs on my head, and they would have been well over 0.5 inches. So instead of going with my original plan for that second grid, I decided that it was more important what my final aesthetic looked like. So I decided to add a row vertically in this section. So instead, what I did was this. So I eyeballed it and I said, okay, let's see. I'm gonna make this is gonna be my cutoff for 2 rows. And then this is going to end up being 3 rows. And that actually worked out really well for me because now in this section, all of the locs are slightly less than ½ inch. Okay, I'm gonna go and I'm gonna finish up putting my hair in those 40 sections. See you in a sec. So these are the 40 original sections that I pre-sectioned before I started installing my MICROLOCS. I'm actually pretty proud that the lines still line up, so that means that there hasn't been too much creeping because I have done 2 reties so far, so I'm pretty happy that the lines are still pretty crispy. Okay, so make sure that you have that pen and paper. Okay, let's do it. So these are the parameters that are based on all of the installation grid photos that I found on the internet, on YouTube, on Pinterest, all over the internet. So here are the general parameters. So from the front of the head to the crown line, there were usually between 8 to 12 rows. I have 12. 4, 4, 4. From the center line to the top of the ear, there were usually 10 to 16 rows. I have 16. 4, 4, 4, 4. So now from the crown line to the top of the spinal cord, in general, there are 15 to 20 rows. I have 22 because I have a big head and also because my nape extended down. So those are the general parameters. You want to figure out how many rows you're going to have from here to here, how many rows you're going to have from here to here in the front, and then how many rows you're going to have in the middle back section from your crown line down to here. And then the fourth parameter is that you want to put the expansion triangle, which is this right here, either 3 rows or 4 rows from your center line. That also outlines what your anchor section is going to be and how wide your anchor section is going to be. My anchor section is 4 columns wide. 4 this way, and then it hits my triangle. So after making my anchor lines, I measured my head in 4 ways. The first way that I measured is from the center to my sideburn. The second place that I measured was from my center crown line to the top of my ear. The third place that I measured is from the front of my head to my crown line. And then the fourth place that I measured is from my crown line to the top of my spinal cord. Then I used the numbers that I got from those measurements and the parameters that I just outlined for you to make a map of my grid and to plan my grid out before I even started installing. So this is the map of my grid. This is all 40 sections outlined. It's not to scale, so note that, but these are all of the sections on my head. This is my center line, this is my crown line, and then this is my occipital line right above my ears. I'm going to post a blank copy of this map on my Instagram. I'm gonna put it in my lock grid section. So if you wanna go to my Instagram at Queenie Leem, I'm gonna put a link in the description box below and you can find this in my highlights. The reason I'm gonna put that up there is just because you might want to see it, you might wanna make your own grid, and this is just like a good example. I would, however, suggest that you go ahead and make your own grid using your own measurements because everyone's head is different. But this is a pretty good example of what I did, and I hope that it helps you. So if you use this and it does help you, let me know, tag me, let me know if this was helpful to you because I really appreciate that and I'm very happy to help you all. So I hope that wasn't confusing, but just in case it was, we're gonna move to my iPad. So using my iPad as a visual aid, I'm gonna briefly review those anchor sections. I'm going to explain how I use those washable markers and then how I got the different sizes to flow into one another from the front to the back. I'm also gonna cover that tricky triangle like expansion area. So let's start with how many rows are in my anchor sections and how my anchor sections actually worked out. From the front of my head to my crown line, I have 12 rows. From my center line down to the top of my ear, I have 16 rows. Then from my crown line, all the way down to the top of my spinal cord, aka the nape of my neck, I have 22 rows. And then for the positioning of this expansion triangle right here, I found that when looking at different grids, that in general, this expansion triangle was between 3 to 4 rows away from the center line. For me, I have 4 rows away from my center line. Now, pretending that I'm using washable markers, since I wanted in the front, I wanted them to be between 1/4 of an inch to 5/16 of an inch. So what I did was I measured from here, and I put a little dot right here, and then I measured from here, and I put a little dot right here, and I measured 1.25 from the center line. That made sure that basically this box in the front would be my target when I split it into quarters. And then as we go towards the back to my crown line, at my crown line, I measured 1.5 inches from my center line on either side. So that makes it so that once you get to these locks at the back, they are slightly larger, and each lock inside of here is now around 3/8 of an inch, which is great because as we moved towards the crown line, we got towards the average size that I wanted on my head. Because 1.5 divided by 4 is 3/8 of an inch, and then up here, 1.25 divided by 4 is 5/16 of an inch. Now for this section, so this is the crown line right here. So now as we go back to this section, this is where it becomes 2 inches. So from here to here, they start really growing in size. So this section in the back is where I have my largest locks, because these are basically 2-inch. So each one of these is a 2-inch square. And then as you head down towards the nape of my neck, they become smaller and smaller. So here it's 1.5 and 1.5, and then here it's 1.25 and 1.25. So my general advice is that if you focus on any areas, you focus on the front section because that's public facing, and you focus on the center back section, like the 4 or 3 rows on either side of your center. So those will be the 2 places that you focus first. And then secondarily, you'll focus on this section. And the reason why you want to focus on that section second is because all you'll have to do is make sure that this section is smaller than this, but slightly larger than this, or slightly larger than these. And your very, very last section that I would suggest doing would be this triangle section. Right there. And really what I tried to focus on when I was coming to this triangle section was that any of these faces had the same amount of locks as the adjacent face. So on this side, there's 4. On this side, there ended up being 5. And then on this side, there is also 5. So as you see, there's 1, 2, 3, 4. Then there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Another brief note on this side section is that I noticed that this is one of the only places in the grids that I looked at where additional locks will just show up. So as you see here, this is what I actually did. I put 6 wide in this section, and then above it there's 5, and below it there's 5. So for my grid, this is the only place where I intentionally didn't have the lines lining up perfectly. So now I'm gonna go over some of the most commonly asked questions that I get. So the question is, once I put my hair in those 40 pre-section mini braids, did I wash my hair? Yes, I did wash my hair. And I actually washed my hair immediately after I finished putting those 40 mini braid sections in my hair. So the reason that I did that was because, as I said earlier, I flat ironed my hair before I parted my hair. And I put a little bit of oil in my hair in order to flat iron it. On top of that, I knew that in general, when you start installing MICROLOCS, you're supposed to have your hair as pristine and clean as possible without flat ironing it or pulling it to extremes. So what I decided to do was to have my hair revert back to its natural texture while still stretched in those pre-section mini braids. So in order to do that, all I had to do was wash it. What I will say is that I wasn't able to fully remove all of the oil, all of the sebum, and all of the buildup that was on my scalp by washing those pre-section mini braids, but that is the reason why I did that apple cider vinegar rinse as soon as I was done installing my locks. Also, while I was going through my MICROLOCS installation, as I would install a single section and the rest of my hair was still in those mini braids, I would wash my hair and I would wash those locks. But I would wash those locks by braiding and banding them first and then washing my hair. So that's what I did. The second question I get is, how long did it take me to actually do the sectioning for my pre-section mini braids? That it took me a full day to both flat iron my hair and then part it. So that was about 8 hours. I invested at least 8 hours just into sectioning my hair into these pre-section mini braids because I felt it was very important that I had a precise grid so that my locks matured in a certain way. So those were all of the details and all of the math behind how I got this precise parting grid. And if you found this helpful in any way, and if you guys are making your own maps or if you're using my maps, please let me know. Make sure to tag me. I'm really, really excited to help all of you guys. I know a lot of people have been asking me about my grid method. I'm so sorry it took me so long to actually put it up. So now we're here and I finally found the time, and I'm just so happy to share the knowledge with all of you guys. So if there's anything that you didn't understand or you still have a burning question, just let me know. Put it in the comment section below and I will try to answer it maybe in an update video. I'm open to making an update for this grid method video. And if you haven't already taken the chance to subscribe, go on and do that right now because there's going to be a lot more videos like this uploaded to my channel and you're going to want to see them as soon as they're uploaded. So as always, thank you so much for watching.